helps me feel connected to people outside of my close niche group. And so I'm excited to talk about some of the ways that you can enter into informational interviews as a form of career exploration. So informational interviewing is really a great thing, whether you're at the beginning of your career or you're in a position that you're very happy with but want to build your network, or whether you're looking to make a change to a new area of work or a new company. And we'll talk about all of those options as we proceed today. But first, I'd like to start off with a poll to hear a little bit more about where the people on this call are in terms of their career journeys. We're launching a poll right now, and the question is, where are you currently in your career journey? Are you new to working full-time in your field? Are you in a position and ready for advancement? Are you thinking about a career change, maybe a new field or a new job entirely? Or are you content with where you are, but you really want to learn what you can do to expand your awareness of what's going on in your field or with your potential colleagues? Or is there another reason that you're joining us today? You can mark other for that. So we'll allow a couple minutes for the answers to come in, and when it looks like we have enough, we will share those results. Again, this presentation is appropriate for anybody with any of those interests. I like to do it informational interviewing, even when I'm really satisfied with where I am. To me, it keeps things really fresh and interesting, and I use it as a way of learning about more specialized parts of my field or new up and coming trends that are probably deserve my attention. I also find it just as a good way to build up my network and to stay connected with people. It's a great way to check in and develop those relationships. So I think we're ready to share the results of the poll. All right, great. So it looks like 40% of the people on the call today are ready for career advancement, which is great. I think this is going to be a really good topic to help you as you're thinking about that. 30% are thinking about a career transition. So this is also a really good good activity to do as you're thinking about changes. And then being new to working in your field, about 10% of the folks on this call, and then 20% who are happy with where you are right now, but open to learning. And I really want to encourage that. We'll go through, all of us will go through each of those stages at different points in our careers. All of them are probably something that we'll experience multiple times. And so even when you're really happy, I think it's great to use that time to continue exploring and to keep the curiosity going. All right. So we'll move forward. I want to tell you a little bit about myself and why I personally love informational interviews. So as Carmen described my biography, there's actually a lot there. I have what I would call sort of a portfolio career. I have multiple interests that I really care about, and I have navigated that by making a lot of different changes over the years. And it's definitely been influenced by who's in my network and what I learned from talking with them. As more of an introvert rather than an extrovert, I find that informational interviews are a really good way for me to connect with people. I like that I can do some research ahead of time and do some planning so that when I go and sit down with somebody, I feel confident about some of the questions that I'm going to ask. And then, once that foundation is there, it's just really comfortable for me to kind of follow my curiosity and to have a conversation and see where that takes me. So the one-on-one piece of it is really, really great for me. And by doing informational interviews, I really work at keeping up the connections afterwards. And so that helps me build my network in a way that is really comfortable for me and very productive. And I would say even if you're on the more extroverted side, I find it very invigorating, I think, to make those connections. And I've heard from many other people that is really part of what energizes them and keeps them going, gives them new ideas about their work, are those personal connections that you make. So I've done many informational interviews over the years, and we'll talk more about this, but informational interviewing is really separate from inquiring about a job. So I want to emphasize that. When I do an informational interview, it's really about my curiosity and building that relationship. But sometimes there is a lot of good that comes out of those conversations that can lead me to the spots of where I want to be in the future, including having people offer to accept my resume or to recommend me for a job. But that's usually secondary to building the relationship. Most of the benefits that I've gotten are really about learning more, kind of following the threads of curiosity, learning about different groups that I can join, classes that I can take, books or articles that people recommend, really getting specific information about a company culture or team dynamics within a organization that I wouldn't know just from my research. And then hearing what kinds of competencies I might need to develop if I want to move forward in that field. Those are things that you may not be able to get just from doing research or from attending large networking events. Sometimes you really need to sit down one-on-one with somebody who has that inside knowledge. And it's really helped me sort of become more confident when I am going for job interviews and being able to speak about myself, answer questions about what I'm looking for. So those are some of the benefits. And then, like I've said, there have been times when it led directly to a job, which is great. Also, you know, that's always a nice benefit when that happens, but not necessarily the intention when you're doing informational interviewing. So let's start by, what do we mean by informational interviews? So it's really a focused conversation that has gives you the opportunity to learn about a job, a workplace, or a field of interest. It's a chance to build rapport with somebody and ask for guidance or advice or insight by having that conversation with somebody who has specific knowledge that you don't have. And like I said, it's definitely not a request for a job. I think sometimes people are concerned when they want to initiate informational interviews that it sounds like a request for a job. So we'll talk about some ways that you can avoid that, that feeling of awkwardness. So another way of doing this informational interview, because it has the word interview in it, can sometimes be maybe not the best term to use, or might feel a little uncomfortable. So you can say career conversation or career information meeting or job exploration meeting. Sometimes if I try to make my request very specific, so I'll frame it in terms of the industry and maybe say like something that feels very informal, like a, short conversation about instructional design or about coaching or whatever it is that I'm looking to talk about with them. And that really sets it up to feel like it's not a very formal meeting that you're asking for. But there are a lot of different terms you can use, and I would say just practice with different terms until it feels comfortable with that person. And it really does also depend on, I think, where you are in your career and what job field you're looking in. Some tend to be more formal, whereas others you might want to use less formal language when you're asking to meet with somebody. Okay, so let's do another poll. This question is, have you ever requested an informational interview before? And it's really a question of, it might be like, have you ever done an informational interview before? But I'm going to ask the flip side of this. So I wanted to make it clear that this is you initiating the informational interview because you wanted to build a relationship or get information from somebody. So the option is yes or no, and it might have been called something different. So just kind of take your best guess at whether you've done it, and then we'll look at the poll results when we have enough answers in. So as I've mentioned, I've done many informational interviews, and I love to work with people as they're thinking about how they're going to do these. So we still have some answers coming in, and we'll give it another minute or so. We'll let everybody log their responses. Okay, now we'll share the results. Great. So about 60% of you have requested an informational interview before, and 40% have not. So we're almost, we're not that far off from being equally distributed. But it is great to hear that that the majority have done, have requested informational interviews before. I think that'll be really helpful as we talk. You can think about your own experiences. And for those who have not done it before, think about what your questions are, or what maybe concerns or obstacles you have, so that we can try to address those during the call, or during the session today. So the next question that we're going to launch on a poll is, have you ever been asked to do an informational interview before? So this is being on the opposite side of that request. You can answer yes or no. This is, has somebody contacted you and asked to have a conversation with you about your career, or asked for advice, how you got into the field that you're in, or something like that, so that you are the one giving the information and kind of responding to a request. So again, we'll give it another minute or so, and you can log either yes or no in response to that question of, have you been asked to do an informational interview before? All right, and we're going to share the results. Okay, great. So about 64% of you said, no, you have not. So we can talk about this too. The focus of this presentation is going to really be more on the asking side of it, but it is an interesting perspective when you do have that experience. So for 36% of you, you have had the experience of responding to a request. And so you might know that often people really enjoy talking about themselves and their career paths. I know that I do. I always feel like when I'm contacted, it's a great opportunity just to reflect on where I've been, what I see happening in the field. I really enjoy giving back in that way. And so it offers a nice perspective to balance out. You know, and a lot of us get nervous when we think about asking for that informational interview time or that conversation. But I think in reality, you know, it can be very enjoyable for the other person who's participating. So great. So we're going to move on now. Okay, so this question is really, we're going to launch the poll. What concerns do you have that need to be addressed in order for you to do an informational interview? And there are many possible concerns. So this doesn't cover a comprehensive list, but these are some of the most common that I've seen. One of them is, you know, one of the responses could be, how do I prioritize informational interviewing? It really does take a lot of time to reach out to a number of people and to make sure that you can build that time into your schedule and meet with them, especially because I really like to make sure it's at a time that's convenient for the person that I'm asking for. So, you know, that question of how do I prioritize this versus maybe some other things that I'm doing in my career can sometimes be an obstacle for people. And then another potential concern is, will I be perceived negatively when I initiate contact? I think there's actually a lot of fear around being perceived as asking for a job, or trying to make a sale, or doing something that might feel very uncomfortable for people. So that can sometimes hinder people as they are requesting time with somebody. And then, you know, just that simple like rejection piece, like what if the person says no, right? So that's a common like where we're anticipating what the response might be before we actually ask. And then the other one is concerns about, you know, usually in an informational interview, you're asking for a concrete amount of time, and it's often very short initially if you don't know the person. And so there are often concerns about, how do I use that time effectively? And then, you know, that question of like, what if it's uncomfortable, especially if this is somebody who you are really not closely affiliated with, that that sense that maybe you will, it'll be awkward when you meet with them. And we'll talk also in this session about like what you can do to kind of make it more comfortable and to help the other person really relax and enjoy the experience too. Or what if it's not very productive? And that goes back to the prioritizing time, I think, of, you know, that concern that you might have some conversations that don't actually yield the results that you're looking for, although I think that sometimes is a matter of perspective. So, and then the concern that many people have, right, about asking a dumb question. And so we'll talk about the types of questions to ask. And how to really, I think, just have the confidence to go in and have a conversation and look at it as the whole of the conversation. And then there's another option for other. So there might be something else that is hindering you, or that you're concerned about, that's not on this list. So go ahead and log as many choices as seem appropriate for you. That might be a concern that you'd want to have addressed, or that you would prefer to have addressed before you initiate these conversations. Okay, and we'll give it just another second to get in all of the responses that we can. Thank you for participating in the polls. It's a really great way for me to know who's out there and what your interests are. And now we're going to share the results. Great. Okay, so I see a lot of different answers. So 2 answers that really stand out are, how do I use the short time effectively, and what if it's not very productive? So we will definitely talk about those on today's presentation, because I think they are very important. And that's really a skill that you develop over time, is how to manage that conversation. And also the piece that comes after, which is your own reflection and your own follow-up, that really makes that time valuable for you and can make it really valuable for the other person as well. So some other ones that were responded to by many of you, 42% said, what will I be perceived negatively? So we can talk about that. And I think I want to mostly give you reassurance that that there are ways of asking that really can make somebody feel honored or really enjoy the experience. So we'll give you some tips for that. And then, concerns about if they say no, and if it's uncomfortable, those are all things that you can work on also just within yourself, to kind of gain confidence and to soothe the nerves that might come with this. Anytime you do something uncomfortable or stretch outside your comfort zone, it can be a little bit nerve-wracking, but that's where the learning happens. So we really want to encourage that. And then the remaining responses, what if I ask a dumb question? There are a few people, it looks like, who answered other, and prioritizing this was also mentioned. So so we will definitely be able to get to most of those today, and if not, you're always welcome to contact me, and I'm happy to give additional tips later on. All right, so that really helps me to know who we have on the presentation today. And I'm going to start by talking about now, how do you decide who to contact for conversation? So for me, it really comes from a place of self-reflection and curiosity. Usually, it's usually starting internally with my own process of where I am in my career and what I'm interested in and what I'm trying to learn. But there are actually lots of different ways that it might come about. You can actually have it be initiated through other people. So we'll talk about that. One of the ways that I like to do that is I'm always researching what's going on in my field. So it might be just using websites or articles to look at what's happening, and then seeing who is listed in those items, whether it's a particular company or particular people within that. I'm always paying attention to whatever draws my curiosity. So I don't worry too much about formal research, because I know that, whatever I'm interested in or like really want to spend time on, it really is a reflection of where I'm headed next, or what my thinking is going to take me into some new areas based on my curiosity. But I will often do a little bit more formal searching on LinkedIn. So we'll try to talk about that a little bit today. I think it's a great tool. There are other social media sites that you can use as well. But LinkedIn is really designed to be a professional network for this purpose. And depending on what kind of access you have, you can either use that to identify some people who are within your circle or companies. I like to follow different companies and see what's going on with them. Or you can sometimes have paid memberships that allow you to do more advanced searches and get further outside of your circle. And I have done that at different times. It served me really well to identify people who are either in jobs that I might like to do someday, or working at companies that I'm interested in. I usually start by trying to identify people I know, and then potentially people that they know, and build out from there. But sometimes I've actually identified people that I don't know at all, who are completely outside my circle, and I've initiated contact and had informational interviews that way. Another great source for thinking about people who are, in your field or a job that you're interested in is your professional associations. So, so thinking about whatever career field you're in, there are usually some kind of groups that might be helpful to you, and you can join them, and that's a great way to really get to know people over time. But even if you don't do that, a lot of groups will host events where you can go even just for one evening, and that's a great chance to get to know people. Oftentimes you'll hear references to various people who are really active in the field, or just strike up a conversation, and people will recommend people whose maybe current professions match your interests. And so I find those to be really helpful. Another great way to think about people that you might want to talk to is using your alumni groups. So joining like the Cal Aggie Association or other groups that you might belong to are a great chance to do that. And you might also have other types of affiliations that you can join groups. It can be, even way back to high school or wherever it is, or different interests that you have using those groups. And then other more general networking events or meetups. There are lots of great opportunities these days. And so, I think about it as being prepared, having a few ideas in mind of what you would want to share about yourself when you meet somebody, and what you're looking for in terms of what you're curious about, so that when you do meet somebody, you can share that information, and it's possible that you'll make a connection, and somebody will seem like somebody that you really want to spend more time talking with. Another way that you can find people to talk with is by asking people for suggestions. So as you start to get really curious, it's about sharing that information with people who either through work or through personal relationships, and asking if they know anybody in that field or in that job or at that company. Oftentimes there are those connections that come to you that way, and it's really helpful. Or that they might have other ways of researching that they'll be able to suggest. And then the final thing is just to follow your curiosity. I always find that when there's something on my mind that I'm interested in or that I want to learn more about, if I start paying attention, there are often opportunities that I might not have noticed otherwise. It might be like a particular event or a class that's coming up, or really just randomly meeting somebody and having that be a topic of conversation. So it's really about being open to whatever might come up as you're thinking about who to talk with. Another piece that you can think about is sometimes these career conversations are with somebody who is maybe at your peer level. It might be somebody who has would be like in a job that you could aspire to right now, or it might be somebody who's more advanced in their career. So so really thinking about, there's a lot of different things. We'll talk a little bit about how do you decide then, as somebody who's maybe a CEO of a company, is that person going to have time? Are they the most accessible person? Maybe not, but what I like to do is, these are a couple of reflection questions, is to think about who I admire, either because of their working style, because of their achievements, because of what I see them doing in the field that they're in, and then think about what inspires you or what makes you curious about them, because those characteristics are actually what you can look for. So you may not actually go for the first person that you think of, but you might be able to find some other people who are actually more accessible, or that you could get an introduction to, or initiate a conversation with, who have some of those same characteristics. So why don't we check in right now and see if anybody has any questions that we can answer before we move forward.
Joanna, we did have a question or an inquiry from Lynette. She, back a few slides, she asked, she selected the other category in the last poll that we put up because, and she mentioned, and for me, that would be addressing with her manager that she needed time to attend an informational interview. She's not sure how her manager would perceive that.
That is a great question. So I think that is about knowing your work culture, first of all, and being able to, sort of frame it in a really positive way. So, I think this is a sensitive subject for people, and we really want to, I think at UC Davis, and especially like with this series, I really want to encourage everybody to be taking advantage of the opportunities that we have here. And I hope that most people have managers who are supportive of this. But you know, if you're not sure whether they would be supportive or not, you can, there are ways around that. So one thing is you can always schedule these conversations for your lunchtime or for the end of the day, the beginning of the day, and see if you can flex your time without needing to address that with your manager if you're concerned about it. You know, I like to meet with a person. We'll talk about this more as we go down the slides, but I like to meet with a person in person if I can. But sometimes, you know, phone is actually most convenient either for me or for them, depending on where I am. And you can usually, you know, find a time slot that can fit into like a 20-minute phone call at lunchtime or end of the day or beginning of the day, where you wouldn't necessarily need to let your manager know. But my hope would be, you know, with my team, I really like to encourage these conversations. I think there are so many benefits, not just to you as an individual, but to your manager as well when you're having those conversations. For one thing, it really does build your network, and that can really benefit us. You know, one of the things I've found is often with hiring or with looking for people who may potentially work with us, this is how people come onto our radar. So in building these relationships, you may actually be contributing to your business at the organization. And I also think that it's very common for all of us to be curious and to be looking for it. And so hopefully you're already having a conversation with your manager. If you're letting them know that, you know, maybe you're very content with your position right now, but someday that you would like to advance, and you want to know, you know, a couple of years down the line, what do I need to be prepared for? That's something that you can share with them. And, you know, you can also share that you're looking at other skills or other processes that you want to integrate into your current job. So there are different things to think about, you know, when you have that conversation. I really hope that you're also sharing with them what things you're curious about, because they may actually be a source of recommendations of people that you can talk to. So I hope that answers it, and if not, again, I'm happy to come back and talk about this a little bit further into the presentation. Okay, so we're going to move on now. And think about how to prepare to introduce yourself and make a request. So as I mentioned, this can be a little nerve-wracking for people, especially in the beginning when you haven't done this very often. But so you want to think about some relevant information about yourself to share. So what I like for you to do is bring to mind one specific person that you might ask for an informational interview. And just for the purposes of this imagination exercise, it can be somebody right now that you already know, just to kind of give you something that concrete to have in mind. But the first thing that I would, you know, be thinking about is when I'm introducing myself, what is the most relevant information for me to share? And I do find that the requests are more likely to be accepted when you have a very specific reason that you're contacting that person. There may be something that you have in common, or there may be something about them that really piques your curiosity, or that you want to learn more about. But connecting the dots for them, they won't know much about you usually when you initiate that conversation. So think about what they need to know in order to feel like a little bit of familiarity with you. And then really, what is it about them that's piquing your interest, so that they know going into it? I think that it does make a difference in terms of the response if they feel like you are asking them specifically for advice or for help because you saw something that really appeals to you about what they've done, versus, you know, I'm contacting everybody I can think of who has project manager as a job title is not going to make them as compelled to help. But when you say, I really see that you've worked at these two companies that I'm really interested in, I'd love to hear about your experiences and what advice you'd have for me, makes it so much more concrete and easier for them to know what kinds of questions you're going to be asking. And then be really specific. Think about it ahead of time. I really do spend a lot of time preparing before I initiate the request, so that when I'm reaching out to them, I know what I'm asking for. And I'll provide a few samples, but usually what I'm requesting is a 20-minute conversation often I ask for it to be in person. I offer to take them to coffee, and make it really clear that I just like to ask some conversations and have some, ask some questions and have some informal conversation. But it may be that you're asking for a phone call, or it may be that you don't think 20 minutes is going to be enough, so you want to ask for a little bit longer. But I try to be really specific about that, so that they know what the request is. And if they want to offer more time, or if they respond back that they have less time to offer you, at least then you really know what it is that you're agreeing to. And then again, I think being really clear about your purpose and your motivation, that you're not contacting them for a job, you're really curious, and that you're considering many options, so that they feel at ease with that. And then I think being very professional and being polite when you are making this request is really important. You want to put your best foot forward as you initiate contact. Great. So there are lots of different ways that you could make a connection with somebody. If you know somebody through somebody else, if you've been, if somebody has recommended somebody because they know them personally, I always think it's really nice to be introduced, whether that's through a phone call or through an email or a text where the other person lets them know that you're going to be contacting them and maybe even has their okay ahead of time. That tends to be the most effective way. But like I said, I've had many instances when I reach out to somebody where I don't know them at all. And so what my preference is to email them, you know, a little bit about myself, what I'd like to have the conversation about, and then I include a link to my LinkedIn profile underneath my signature, so that they feel like they can go see a little bit about me. They can kind of learn about a bit before they say yes. That's what feels most comfortable to me, and the way that I like to work with people. But you know, other people will just pick up the phone and initiate a phone call, and that's fine too. And I think when you do that, just be prepared with that sort of short description of yourself and what you're looking for in that conversation with them, so that you're able to get to the point pretty quickly and they know what the purpose of your phone call is. And with this, I like to really say, because I'll show a couple of examples of emails I've sent, but I want to encourage you to use language that suits your industry. So you may be in a very informal setting or a very informal field, and you can be a little bit more relaxed when you're asking for a conversation. However, if you are reaching out to somebody who maybe is in a high level position, or you work in a field where there's more hierarchy or more formality, then you want that to be reflected in your reach out. And the other thing that I always make sure to emphasize in my request, and do my best to accommodate, is being flexible to accommodate their schedule. And I think, you know, to the piece where I was answering Lynette's question, sometimes you don't have a lot of flexibility, and that's okay. I think that you can try to offer some times or offer some things that would work for your schedule ahead of time, so that they're not just guessing, like saying, you know, unfortunately I don't have a lot of time, but if we could meet at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, or I could schedule time with you on my lunch hour. I think it's okay to say that up front. But again, you know, I've had people that I reached out to where I knew, based on sort of their level, their position, that they may not be able to fit me in for several weeks. And so I really made it okay in my email and saying that I would be happy to schedule it for whenever their schedule would allow. And then, like I said before, I really like to meet in person if possible, but I also think that there are some advantages to asking to do a video or a phone call. You know, I think people are really comfortable these days with technology, and it can also alleviate concerns about the amount of time that it will take. So, you know, if this is your very first conversation with somebody and you're only asking for 20 minutes, then a video or a phone call might work really well. So it really just depends on also what you feel most comfortable with and what you think the other person will be able to fit into their schedule. So here's a sample email, and this will be available in the handout, but it's just a little bit, I actually think it's a little bit long. If I were to write it now, I think I would make it probably a little bit shorter. But it kind of shows you some of the things that I would include about myself and about the other person. And then it really, in the last paragraph or towards the end, it's really specific about what I'm asking for, which is a 20-minute phone or video call when it's convenient for them. Or, you know, if they're not available, asking if they'd be willing to introduce me to somebody else on their team, or somebody else they know of who might be willing to talk with me. So that's one. Here's another example. And I think this one is a time when I was doing an informational interview or a conversation with somebody else, and they recommended somebody to me that I reached out to. So I think whenever that's the case, it is really helpful to let them know where that connection came from. So these are a couple of examples that you'll get in the handout. So then taking a minute again to think about this as a reflection question, just think to yourself, what's one question you would most like to ask someone? So usually what I do is I think about, back to the last set of reflection questions, you know, who is it that I'm really curious about? What do I admire about them? And then, like, what's something that I would really like to ask them? And again, I really, you know, I spend a lot of time brainstorming. It's something I enjoy doing and thinking about what all my questions are. And then I really try to figure out which of those questions could I answer on my own through research or through contacts that I already have, and which ones are something that are really unique to asking a person, that they would have information that isn't readily available out there, or that is more specific to their experience, so that I can really hear that unique perspective. So as you get ready to do your informational interview, as it's been agreed upon, some of the things that I really like to do are preparing ahead of time. There are lots of lists out there that you can use with sample informational interview questions, and I think that's a great place to start, but I always customize them as well. So I will often have a very long list of just informational interview questions that I keep for myself that I like in general. And then I'll go through ahead of time and I'll really look at that, and I'll figure out which ones are appropriate for this person, which ones are my most interested in learning about. And, you know, really deciding that. And so, and I will really plan for the time that I have. So I might take that longer list of general suggestions and then create a set of very concrete questions that I might want to ask during the conversation that really fit this person. And I often prioritize them so that I know if it for some reason the call is very short or my time is very short, what's most important to me. And I always try to plan for the very beginning questions are about establishing that relationship and making them feel comfortable. So, you know, you're not starting with the most private or difficult to answer questions. You're starting with the ones that just help them feel comfortable with you and get to know you. And then as you feel that sense of trust is developing, then you can ask some of the sort of more specific questions that only they would know. And one of the things that I really believe in, and it comes with practice, which is I let go of my list of questions after I've prepared it, which means it's there if I need it, but if the conversation goes in a different direction, I really embrace that. I want to be flexible. I want to hear what they have to offer me in that conversation, and I know that, you know, new questions often come up through that conversation. So I don't stick with my list of questions just because I've prepared it ahead of time, but it does make me feel more comfortable. And again, I'm really conscientious about the person's time. And so if we agreed to a half an hour, then, you know, I know that I'm going to be looking at my watch and making sure that a few minutes before that half an hour is up, that I let them know that I want to be mindful of their time and I have one more question. And then if they want to offer to give more time to the conversation or to follow up later, then I'm always welcome that and very grateful for that. But it's not an expectation that I have. I want to really kind of just appreciate what they've been able to give me and make sure, I think that demonstrates your own ability to manage time well and to be courteous to their needs. So here are some sample questions, and again, these will be on the handout, but really there are a lot of different questions that are available on the internet. You can think about questions that you might want to ask during an interview, but you wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable. You know, they're not going to be unprofessional questions, but they might be things about like organizational culture, or what a team is like, or what a job is really like, what the challenges are, what they find really engaging about their work. Some things that will give you that sort of insight into the profession that you might not necessarily feel comfortable asking during an interview. And it's an opportunity. A lot of times I really will be allow myself to be vulnerable and ask them, you know, I'm worried that I don't have enough experience in this area. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think I do? Do you think that I need to take some classes? What would you recommend? It's a really good chance to kind of ask those questions that you may not be able to have answered otherwise. And then during the conversation, so, you know, I think being calming your own nerves as much as you can before you go and meet with them will really help. If you kind of take some deep calming breaths beforehand, arrive early, as you would for an interview, or if you're doing a phone call, making sure that you schedule your time so that you have a break before you do the call, so that you're actually ready and set up to go before you need to call them. Keeping it really professional and keeping it comfortable as much as you can. And again, that's just a skill set I think that comes over time. It's learning to get more comfortable with reaching out to people you don't know and having that conversation. I think one of the most important things, and again, you can practice this even with your friends or colleagues, is really making sure that when you're in that conversation that you're listening and you're not trying to think ahead to the next question. You want to be really present, because I do think that it's noticeable when you're very concerned about, you know, maybe asking the next question, that behavior can kind of be noticeable. So you want to really just enjoy the conversation and try to make the most of it. And then, like I said, I always plan for the unplanned with this. So I want to be flexible if they're sharing information that goes in a different direction. Even if it doesn't feel as useful to me, I still really want to kind of honor that, because sometimes that information actually is really useful and I don't realize it until later. And also, because that really might be what they think I need to know. And sometimes, you know, these unplanned questions will pop up and they really, you know, make sense based on where the conversation is going. So I try to stay in the flow of the conversation and ask things as they occur to me. And then when you're getting ready to end it, like I said, you really want to keep track of time. It's such an important piece of this, is to note the time, to be monitoring that. And then you can end with a conversation or with a question. This is something that people ask about a lot, which is it's perfectly okay, especially if your sense is that they're ready to move forward and they're not necessarily offering to continue the relationship. Then I think, you know, saying a warm thank you and then following up with an email and a thank you note later expressing what you got from the conversation is great. You know, with some people, you can sense that they might be open to more continued connection. And so one of the questions that I like to ask, if I sense that they're open to it, is, you know, now that you've heard some of my interests and we've talked about this, is there anybody else that you would recommend I speak with? Or if that feels too uncomfortable in that moment, what I might do is just say, what other resources would you suggest I look at? Now that, you know, we've had this conversation, is there someplace else that I should be looking to learn more about this? I think that's a really important piece. So if that opportunity is there, you can kind of continue your learning and continue having these conversations. But again, even if this conversation is sort of, you reach the end point, what you really want to do is express that gratitude that they've taken the time to do that. And then I always send a thank you note, and I really do try to make it specific with what really stood out to me from the conversation. And I've been on the receiving end of this, and I think it really does help you to as the person who's having these conversations, to learn more about that person, what stood out to them, what was important to them, that they paid attention and that they got something from it. And then I really do try to follow up, because I think that when they make recommendations and you're able to come back to them later and talk about how that helped you move forward on your curiosity process, I think that can be really great for that relationship. And then when they're open to it, I like to, connect with them on LinkedIn. I like to send them updates occasionally. So if I've changed jobs or have some other events that's happening for me, or if I see articles that they might be interested in, I think doing those periodic updates with your connections can be great. And then I really want to emphasize the conclusion of this career conversation is not to send your resume unless they've specifically asked you for it, which I have had happen many times. But when that request is there, it's great to follow up and send them your materials. But if it hasn't been offered, then I would not send them your resume or do anything that feels like you're asking for a job. I would really focus more on building the relationship over time. So I think we'll check in and see if we have some questions. Okay, great. So there are no questions right now. Let's do one more poll. So after everything that you've heard today, how confident would you feel conducting an informational interview right now? Very confident, somewhat confident, a little confident, not confident at all, or not sure. So go ahead and think about those options. You can think realistically about that confidence level. Okay, we'll go ahead and share the results. Great, that's awesome. That's a really good number. 71% of you said that you feel very confident, and 29% of you said somewhat confident. So I'm curious to know, for those of you who said somewhat confident, what would help you to move from somewhat confident to very confident? What would it take? So you can use the chat feature to share some of your answers. Would love to hear from you what more you think would be helpful to really move you into that place of confidence and taking action on having these career conversations. And if you are very confident, you can also add, what is it that makes you confident? Is there something that you have learned or something that you tell yourself that gives you confidence? All right, so let's see what you folks have said.
Hi, Joanna. So Lynette has shared, this is quote, for me, it would be preparedness, such as doing my research ahead of time and having my LinkedIn be up to date, etc.
Yeah, great point. Okay, great. Well, I'm glad you mentioned LinkedIn, because that is actually an area where I get questions about a lot. And people seem to really, I obviously know a lot of super users of LinkedIn, but I think it's also a tool that many people wonder about, like, how can I make the best use of it? So I think, having your profile up to date is really important. And a lot of us only think to do it when we want to make a change. So I actually think the best time to do it is when you are very happy with where you are and you have that time to think about your accomplishments and think about what you want to share sort of publicly. And you have different settings that you can choose in terms of how much you share widely and how much you share just with people within your network. But I would encourage everybody, if you're on this call or if you're listening to it recorded later, to use this as a good reminder to go in and update your LinkedIn account. I was just actually thinking about myself, and there are a number of things that I haven't added on there recently. And so it doesn't have to be that you've gotten a new job. You may still be in the same job, but there might be some new projects that you've worked on, some awards or recognitions that you've received, some classes that you've taken, some groups that you're participating in. Those are all really great things to include on your LinkedIn profile. Another thing that's really helpful is to make sure that your skills are up to date, and you can have people endorse you for those. You can also get testimonials. And again, we often think to do that when we're making a change, but this could be a really good time to reach out to a couple of people and ask if they would provide a testimonial for you to put on your LinkedIn site. I think, some other things, it's really gotten to be a very, a lot of different categories available on your profile. So things like languages and volunteer activities are great to include as well. And what I like is, I know for myself, one of the activities that really helps me to think about what I want to present is that research that I do when I'm looking at other people's profiles. That's where I get a lot of different ideas. So there are things that I might not think to include on my own, but I can see some really great profiles and think, oh, that's really inspiring. The other thing that I think is really important is the heading that is underneath your name. A lot of times I think by default it will put in your current position, but that may not reflect where you want to go in the future or what's really important to you. Some of us, have those experiences where, we have a title that isn't actually very descriptive. And so I've heard actually from people who work at LinkedIn that they often include more of a values statement, like what is it that they do and for whom. Rather than their specific position, because your position will appear in underneath your current job. Another piece that's really important is to have a professional picture up on your LinkedIn profile. So if you don't have a good picture or it's it's outdated, this might be a good time to ask somebody to take a nice professional picture of you when you're in your work clothes, or doing something that really reflects what's important to you, in to have that represent you. Again, like LinkedIn is very different from other social media sites, so you want to make sure that it is appropriate for work. So that would be my advice, is really to get in and keep your profile up to date. Maybe even set a reminder to yourself to update it every few months. Go in and check and make sure. It's also like over time, you'll find that some of the information that you have on there doesn't need to be there anymore. So it's great to kind of go in with that eye too, of what do you want to focus attention on more. That really will evolve as your interests evolve. So so those are some suggestions with using LinkedIn. And then again, just going in and exploring and looking at who's on there, I think I want to encourage people to do that. It sometimes can feel a little bit weird, but it's really a great way of seeing, what companies are people working at? What positions are they in? What skills do they need to develop to move into those different positions? It's a great tool to do that research. All right, so I think we're nearing the end of our time. I want to make sure that if you have questions that you're able to submit them. And we'll give it a minute to see if anybody does. All right. Well, thank you all for joining me today and for having me here. I'm really excited to be able to talk about this topic, and happy to answer questions if there are any in the future.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you so much. Very informative. I want to share with, you're getting a lot of thank yous coming in from chat. I want to thank everyone who's participated today. I'm also going to share with you that if Joanna, if she inspired today, LinkedIn, updating your LinkedIn profile or preparing this informational interview, all staff and faculty have an opportunity to meet with a career counselor or career coach. And so with that, I'm going to post the information to get connected with the career counselor or career coach. Also, if you're interested in signing up for our listserv, you can certainly do that by sending your email to sdps@ucdavis.edu. The career counselor for UC Davis campus, you would meet with her at the Heitman Staff Learning Center, and appointments here is listed, the phone number and email where you can receive your schedule an appointment. If you work for UCD Health, they have a career coach Judy Eisenman, she would meet with you, and you can make an appointment with her by calling the listed number or emailing her directly. Again, I'd like to thank you for attending. I'm going to now put up the last poll of the day. And if you can complete the poll and share your opinion about how this workshop worked out for you, we would greatly appreciate it. Otherwise, have a great day and a long weekend.